Hello and good day. I'm Cristina Caffarra and welcome to Escape Forward, the space where I get to talk to some of my favorite people who got something new and original to say or are pushing for change across policymaking and tech in particular. I'm particularly delighted today to have with me Andy Klinger, who is a real superstar in tech, was a runaway sensation at my conference about a few weeks ago, talking about the work he does. Briefly, he's originally Austrian, experienced startup founder. He's a CTO. He has created a number of companies pretty much across the world, as well as in Europe. He spent the obligatory 5 years in San Francisco and in Silicon Valley, then came back to Europe and wrote and said many times that he considers himself a proud European. Then turned into a funder, a champion for European tech. Now, amongst many other things, he runs a fund Prototype that writes checks for European startups. First check, first round, pre-seed, all frontier tech, automation, robotics, engineering, and so on. He also hosts a well-known YouTube channel, Prototype, that gives visibility to the most ambitious European tech startups, very popular channel. But also, and the reason we are starting this conversation here today is very much that he is well known for having inspired and led a very high-profile campaign known as EU Inc., which is actually succeeding in creating a uniform regime for European startups. It is being adopted by the European Commission. President von der Leyen mentioned it in Munich. A rare case, in fact, of a grassroots campaign that actually succeeded, got there, and very fast. So, Andreas, welcome. We will talk, of course, about EU Inc., where it stands, how you got there, also the future of Europe, inevitably Eurostack, my own initiative, which is running alongside, shares much of the common mission. You're welcome. You started writing, in fact, as long as 15, almost 20 years ago, about what was missing in European in the European ecosystem to develop a sort of a startup tech ecosystem that was going to be successful and was going to be durable. And of course, the diagnosis that you had back then is one that has become well established. We know it, it's the whole lack of risk appetite, the limitations of capital, appetite for risk indeed, and all of that fragmentation and so on. And then around 23, 24, you wrote a very interesting post that was titled, "Dear Europe, please wake up." And in there, you were pushing back against what you described as the American meme about Europe. This vision that Europeans work less, that Europeans spend less time, the quality of life is so good that we don't make a real effort, and so on. So you were saying, with facts, this isn't actually my experience. But then you said what is really holding us back in Europe is friction. So with apologies for the long introduction, but I wanted to frame the discussion. I think that's where we start. I'd really like to hear you talk about your understanding of this friction, how you ended up settling on that as being the main problem that you needed to solve, and how you then went about thinking of solving it. Over to you.
Great. This is based, I would say, a lot also in discussions I had in San Francisco. A lot of the discussions I had there always felt like very simplistic, like essentially how much we take the current status quo and just say this is how it is, and then out of that we just say like everything is different is the reason why things are bad. So my classic one was in San Francisco with my co-workers, like Europe has too much socialism, not enough capitalism. And I'm like, dude, we invented capitalism. What the hell are you talking about? And if you actually look at just at the numbers, right, like 24% of the world's unicorn founders are actually European, and only 38% are American born. Okay. The problem is the European ones don't start those companies in Europe. They start them in the US. And there's like hundreds of reasons. You could argue like maybe it's a mindset problem, maybe it's just like too hard here, the people around you don't support you and so on and so on. I always believe that mindset is actually the outcome of a system. If it's more likely that stuff succeeds, I'm more likely to do stuff. If that stuff is more likely to go really big, I'm more willing to do more risk, So for me, mindset is always an outcome of a system. And the system we have in Europe is the fundamental problem. If you want to say it a little bit less abstract, we are a bunch of small markets that, isolated from each other, act and compete on global level against massive blocks. So it's not Europe versus US and China, it's the Netherlands or Slovenia, or Italy against China or US. And on that level, in a time where like power law is everything, where like winner takes it all is everything, in times of like massive blocks, that's not really competitive. And the main idea behind EO Inc. was like, how can you, at least for founders, create this unified market that actually works for them? So it's actually possible to say, I want to raise money quickly. And the analog to this is the US Delaware Inc., which is a legal entity in America. And a lot of founders in Europe actually use it just to be able to actually raise money efficiently, because no investor understands how the Hungarian legal entity is called or works, or Slovenian or Italian. Like it's outside of those countries, nobody uses them. So why should I now learn how they work and go into risk as an investor? I don't want that. I don't want to like 5 years later figure out, hey, there's a fun gotcha in Slovenian corporate law. Did you know that? That's not what you want to do when you invest millions of dollars. And the outcome of this like uncertainty is that in Europe, less than 18% is actually pan-European when it comes to early stage investing. Or differently put, if you don't have local angels, most likely you won't be able to quickly raise, you won't be able to raise a lot, and especially you won't be able to raise from the best people worldwide. And that's the big disadvantage that European founders here have. It's like, there's like this common saying in Brussels, like, we have enough startups, we need more scale-ups. And I think that's bullshit. We need more acceleration. Because if we have a ton of companies that just break out in velocity, there will be a lot of investors who want to put money into those. The real problem we have is acceleration. And this fragmentation between all these little markets is like the fundamental problem. And this is this big system disadvantage that founders have here in Europe, in my opinion.
So what you identified as friction ultimately was this notion that the 27 or however many member states have different tax rules, different legal requirements, and all of that was daunting for a startup that has to create a position across markets. Of course, it doesn't in itself address the issue of funding, for example, the fact that funding is also fragmented. We don't have a unified pool of capital, but your effort has been certainly focused on that sort of friction that really prevents people from even thinking about going beyond the national kind of border, right?
So the way I think of this is most of my investments in San Francisco never leave California. They have like one office in San Francisco, but they raise money globally. This is really, really hard to do in Europe. Like if you are based in Slovenia, it's very unlikely that people outside of Slovenia will invest in you. And we can call it like friction, that's fair, but just like this additional effort to figure out like, how do I invest in a Slovenian company? And it's not so much like, yes, of course I can figure it out. I can spend a few days like finding a lawyer that hopefully has experience with startups. I can find out if the founder picked the right entity, the right setups, the right everything. Then I can figure out how can I translate all of the things that I expect into Slovenian law, and so on and so on and so on. I'm willing to do this if I want to invest, like, let's say, multiple $1 million, I'm not going to do this if I'm an angel and I'm like literally one of the first people giving this person money. Like, it's just not, like, imagine you're just like a wealthy tech entrepreneur, like a founder in France. Would you now go and spend 2 weeks with like a Slovenian lawyer figuring out all the details? And the upside is that everything is like the same, as if they would have just picked a Delaware Inc. or like some entity that your lawyer knows, you know. The downside is that 5 years later, you figure out all of your investment is like gone or not worth nothing, although the company is a billion dollar use case now. And so the realities of this is, even let's say you as an English or French angel want to do this because you want to support Hungarian corporate law for some reason, you know, you're doing all this effort. The next big investor, why should do they that? You know, like why should do they? Like they will just be like, look, there's standards. Can we just use the standards and trust them? You know, and this lack of standards, the way I think of it is not even like legal entities, like infrastructure. Like you don't want a euro that's different in every country. You don't want like, you know what I mean? It's like we have the euro. The euro doesn't solve every problem we have in finance, but it makes trade across borders so much easier. And that's like the same thing. It's just a standard.
So just take us through what the EU Inc. ultimate initiative involves.
Yeah.
As it happens, I think you were somewhat helped perhaps along the way by the fact that in 2024, Enrico Letta, the former Italian prime minister, just before the Draghi report, issued his own Letta report. And one of the key recommendations there was something he called the 28th regime. So in effect, this was a parallel idea, but was very much going in the same direction. So you had wind in your sails also, I think, because it was
100%.
recognized by someone like Letta that this was an absolute necessity. But tell us a bit about the evolution of the campaign and how it really unfolds, but also where you are now. What's going to happen next?
If you think of innovation in startups as like infrastructure, like so basically what are standards and like what are the things that you need to actually have pan-European scale, that's being able to quickly start and quickly raise money and then ultimately to do an exit, and the exit with the pan-European legal stock market, for example, you know. For the first part, for like the quick incorporation and quick investments, the idea was to have like something analog to the Delaware Inc. So a standard that all the investors know, trust, and the idea is like if you just like have done this 50 times, if it's the same legal documents, you might not even need to involve your lawyers. Like if I do an investment in an American company and it's the same standard documents I already know, I can just directly sign because it's like there is no surprise. You know what I mean? And my point of view is like out of this kind of standards comes confidence. Out of confidence comes like momentum, and out of momentum comes ultimately speed. And this was the idea. So like, let's create a standard for legal entities in Europe. So the problem is, as you might have talked once or twice, Europe is a messy system of multiple countries and not like one big country, you know? So how do you do the alternative here? And originally we were thinking we just introduce holding companies very transparently, very easy, as a private market solution, essentially. This is what founders nowadays do anyway. And then at the same time, the Letta report mentioned the 20th regime. And I want to give a shout out here to startup associations who pushed a lot to make that actually happen. And then we saw like, okay, wait a minute. All of a sudden, this thing that so far everybody in Brussels told us, yes, would be the right solution, but will never happen, like the 20th regime, almost like a meme, you know, it was almost like a joke. Like it's like, yeah, of course. Yeah, that's the right idea, but no. All of a sudden, that was like in discussion. We're like, hey, you know what? Instead of like doing this holdco hack, what if we just push and just get that properly done, you know? And what we did as the next step was we went and worked together with the best legal teams in Europe. So for startups like Auric, Burdenberg, Osborne Clark, multiple big successful law firms, 100+ open source contributors. And we wrote like essentially a proposal. How could you, within European law, with all the different trade-offs, find a solution for a legal entity that would solve the problems for startups? And the way we think of this is it's not a perfect solution, but it's a stack ranking by priorities and trade-offs according to those. And you might have the same idea, the same goal, but if you stack rank trade-offs differently, you come up with a very different solution. And we intentionally said, like, let's think this properly through, because we cannot expect politicians to know all these trade-offs that are important to founders, and made like an 80-page legal proposal. If you're very bored at some point, feel free to read it. It's 80 pages legal text, you know. We got over 23,000 founders, investors in Europe behind this. Like basically every unicorn founder, every investor that matters signed this and said like, yes, this makes sense. It's not perfect, but it's a solution that actually would improve everything by a step function. The main idea behind it is, in a nutshell, is one new legal entity on the European level is by standardizing corporate law for this legal entity. So it's like on European level, there's now like a 28th version of corporate law, and like this one counts for this entity in all of the countries that implement it. But, and this is the trade-off, we keep employment and taxation local. And the reason is very simple. We want this entity to be available to any kind of company, no matter if somebody in Brussels thinks they are like innovative enough, no matter if somebody in Brussels thinks they are big or too small or whatever. We want that these kind of companies can take this entity and grow and get big through funding and through all these kind of things as quickly as possible. Period.
So in some sense, this is perhaps helped by the fact that what you were doing was inventing a new regime that,
Yes.
given the way things work in Europe, did not require individual countries to change their own laws and uniform them, because that would have been a total doom loop given the speed and the way in which
Yes.
people work in Europe. So the real innovation here was to create a different paradigm altogether.
Yes.
Where are you now? So, von der Leyen has talked about it, including in Munich, and there is a lot of expectation that this is going to come very imminently. Where are things?
We are now in the perfect Schrödinger state. It's now like on one hand extremely successful, and also nobody absolutely knows anything, because in the end, like we are basically rain dancers. Like we are doing stuff and then hoping something happens. We don't make the law, And
so it goes in a black hole. It goes in a sort of a black box.
Yeah, it's not as bad, but it's still a very non-deterministic, policy, But like right now, the Commission said that they want to propose how they think it's doable in March. So like I assume that means end of March. Everybody assumes like around 18th, 20th of March. Let's see. We have now like a few meetings with them, like this week and next week, to like give feedback on stuff. Let's see. Right now, what we managed is that the goal is agreed on. The stack ranking is roughly agreed on, which is already like a big win from our point of view. The ambition level is hopefully agreed on. Like that's always like what people say and do is like always a thing. The question are now like the implementation details, and they still make or break the whole thing. Like from my point of view, the problem you have with politicians is that they think of it as how much political effort is this to make this happen? And we think more like how much is like the effort to actually build something that's going to be adopted, like making it like something that people actually will use is the hard thing. You know what I mean? And there's like finding quick little hacks in politics to make something like pass is great, but if the thing afterwards is useless, then we're nowhere.
And do you have the usual kind of traps in European policymaking? Is that you have divide and rule, you have different member states who in the end need to also approve the path, not just the Commission, not just the Parliament. In different places, somebody is throwing in some spanner in the works. Are you in this world in which you don't know exactly which member states are really supporting and you're lobbying there?
So right now, everybody's in the waiting position because everybody wants to first see what is the actual proposal that Brussels does now.
Yeah.
That being said, my background is engineering, not politics. If this whole thing would be like software, I would assume it's built in a way to be dysfunctional, because especially in our case, to make it actually properly implemented, all the countries would need to agree on it, And we have like 27 members. If I think about it, like statistically significant means you have one case in 20 that's different. And it's still like, yes, that's fine. Let's move on. It's like statistically significant. Like, let's make a decision. In Europe, it's like 1 in 27 blocks everything. So it's like, what the hell? Who came up with that? That being said, we still push for that because we believe that it only makes sense to do it proper. And we also intentionally, from the very beginning, had as a compromise, like not employment, not taxation, just corporate law. The only goal of this is to get more money into your startups in your country. That's the only goal of it. We will see. I always hear about people who will be against it. I have not met anybody who is actually against it yet. And I think this will crystallize in the next quarter. Let's see. I'm always hearing like this country could be against it, but like so far everybody likes it.
Because you don't have the problems others have, and we'll get to that the sort of the powers that be, the hyperscalers, are lobbying necessarily against you. This is not something that they really presumably hate as much as they hate.
The problem we have in Europe,
so
there aren't enough tech hyperscalers.
We'll get there. We'll
Hopefully.
get there. So I want to broaden the lens a little bit. So thanks for that summary on EU Inc. And of course, we're all keeping fingers crossed about where things are going. But the reason this is also exciting is it fits into a time, a period in Europe. And you spoke at my conference. You were super, super popular on your panel for sort of saying it like it is. We are at a time when, of course, we are realizing in Europe that there is no time to waste, that we are absolutely many dimensions digital colony. This is a phrase I use quite often, although it upsets people. And you focused on the question of startups, but the broader tech landscape in Europe is certainly one that is behind. And the reason we care is not just the resilience and security dimension, but it's also the notion that tech feeds into every sector of the economy. And if we're not invested properly in tech, then we are not growing the way we should. So what do you see as, the path to European resurgence to some extent in tech? I mean, there is a narrative out there that says, well, we've kind of given up on cloud and software and all those things because we have no chance of recovering the ground. But there is a huge opportunity for us in AI, particularly given our own special domain knowledge in mechanics and engineering, the kind of things that Europe is a champion of. We combine that with AI, our own data, special industrial data, then we become champions of industrial AI. We'll do so many verticals. We don't need to do LLMs. That's kind of done. And that will be the path to future Europe resurgence. What do you see now as that kind of landscape? What's investable? What is promising? How do you see it?
Yeah, like the next 20 minutes is two people agreeing on everything. There's like a quote in a book that recently came out, which is called Breakneck, about Chinese industrialization. And there's like an interview with a guy at Foxconn during COVID. And all of a sudden, Foxconn, which is known for, Apple phones and all the most high-tech stuff, builds like hygiene products, like masks and everything for COVID. And they were asked like, hey, why are you doing this? This isn't really your core competence. This is already like an established market, blah, blah, blah. And the guy's like, our core competence is making money. And in Europe, I like genuinely, like, people told me we should no longer focus on LLMs because it's done. It was like already 2 years ago. And since then, so much happened, And I feel like we are very, very good at quickly giving up on stuff, which is to me absolutely hilarious. And then the other part is in the things where we're actually good at, we're really, really good at not giving them an space to grow anymore, so that they either have to leave to the US or sell to Asia, And for example, in industrial, as you mentioned, is a good example. Like Europe is very proud of being the second largest manufacturing hub in the world. And we have some of the best precision manufacturing, CNC, some of the best industrial robots. But we are systematically selling them to Asia. Like in industrial robotics, like pretty much every important European company has been sold to Asian private equity or competitors, you know. In my general opinion is we should absolutely stop doing that and instead reindustrialize and build up the next generation of these kind of companies. Because the same way as we are now dependent on digital, we will depend on hardware. And at some point, if you are every euro you make, you send 20 euro to the token provider in San Francisco, and then 20 cents you send to China for the hardware, and then all of a sudden, like your margins go down lower, you have no more value chain in Europe all of a sudden. You know what I mean? And so ultimately, if we go this path and continue this path, we are a very nice, quirky tourist destination, and that's about it. You know, and I think this is absolutely ridiculous. I personally, with my fund, I heavily invest in hardware robotics automation because I think this is something where we actually have a claim to be winners. And if you are building robotics, like right now, Zurich or Munich is as good of a hub as like San Francisco, and it makes complete sense to invest there in winners. And all of the computer vision stuff that's now famous in robotics, or all of the like comes out of that region. All of the reasoning in LLMs comes out of Europe as well. Like so much of the core technology actually comes from here. We are so bad creating a system where they can absolutely afterwards become a core company. In hardware, you have a little bit of an advantage. If you are selling a robot for an industry, customers don't really care where you're based. And language issues are not so much of an issue. Like there's a lot of things that are a big topic in like, so if you do like social media or like if you do enterprise sales and all this kind of stuff, which is less of a topic if you're building hardware. So for me as an investor, this makes a lot of sense. That being said, the next generation of farmers will use electric tractors that are fully autonomous, that can like be controlled through an iPad and then an AI agent. The question now is like, will we build them, or will they be built in China and we will just buy the ones in China, you know? And my personal take is we have to build them here, period. You know, you can call it sovereignty if you want, but I also think of it very pragmatic. It's the value chain. If we don't have these GDP driving companies, we don't have like these premium companies, we don't have these premium jobs, which are apparently needed for our premium living. So it's either we now get to the point that we are stop, you know, we fix our attitude towards success and towards being number one in topics, either now, or we are pretty much like as bad as America currently puts propaganda on us in 10 years, you know? So we have, like, from my point of view, we have now 10 years and we have to decide how much do we still want to fuck around. Like, that's my POV on that.
You said 20 minutes of people agreeing with each other because, of course, I could undersign everything you said. Let's kind of riff a little bit more around that.
Yeah.
The kind of narrative that we hear now is very much, as I said, oh, but this industrial AI will be our future. We don't need to look back at the other bits of the value chain because, you know, we will grow all of that kind of frontier stuff in industrial AI and it'll be cool and we will be making Europe great in that way. And it's one thing that I find bizarre in this narrative is, well, but the value chain is the same. You don't build AI industrial structure on air. You still need compute. You still need software. And if that value chain is owned by completely somebody else, sending revenues and profits somewhere else, how is that going to grow us? That seems to be a very basic notion. I mean, I'm glad that you brought up this value chain and the fact that we need to appropriate in Europe the absolute substance of these value chains that we build, because it is something that seems to be forgotten in all of this. It's almost as if, you can build on this other cloud over here. You just get the bit on the top. Can you elaborate why just getting the bit on the top is just not a plan?
I think it's very easy when it comes to manufacturing. So the classic idea is you have like what's very valuable is like the R&D, then manufacturing is like as cheap as possible, like serial production, and then you have marketing and branding, and it's like making it wealthy again. Like these are the value parts, this is a low value part. The problem you have in any non-completely established technology, like frontier tech, for example, can be anything, like your phone, for example. So much of R&D actually stems out of manufacturing issues. And so much of the new R&D that, or like the new, like the way you are actually like, the new features you're building in hardware, so much come out of new capabilities in manufacturing. Like you ran into a problem, you figured something out, oh, we can do this, holy shit, we can do this now. Hey, let's do the next model we do around that idea, you know? And that's in manufacturing completely normal. To some extent, you basically, who owns the manufacturing also owns the R&D at some point. And the same is true in software, especially nowadays when you have almost like fully verticalization through like AI stack. So the way to think of LLMs is not like this is a new layer in software. This could be the industry after software, you know? And if you can say, yes, we are building a very good a layer on top that allows better use for legal, you know, and that maybe that's a valid business, you know? But there's a non-zero chance that the next generation of LLM models can just do that layer on their own. You know what I mean? So you have almost the same problem. Like to actually compete with them, you should at some point build like new foundational models. You should like go completely deep in there at some point if you really like want to be completely competitive. But you can't do that because they make money with legal and 50 other things at once. So like all of a sudden you have a different economy of scale. The same in manufacturing. You know, like right now, people don't go to China because they're so much cheaper. They go to China because they can actually do those things that you can't. And soon they can do them even if their labor costs go up, they can do them a fraction of your cost because they fully automated it, and you can't. You know what I mean? And all of that learning is like compounding and compounding over time. And we just somehow in the 80s, somebody had this genius idea. I think this is like something Wall Street and cocaine combined. I don't know. Of like, let's outsource every cost center because who cares anyway? And since then, we all of a sudden, like step by step, outsourced actually core competence and core know-how. And that's something we have to reverse. And from my point of view, for a region, even if you're not the best in something, you know, you still have to put effort into this region. Like, for example, in your case with the Euros, like even if you're not the best cloud provider in the world, you know, the learnings you get out of this building a cloud provider, the teams, the people, the process knowledge will enable them to build some other new ideas that pop up, you know, and so on and so on.
This is exactly the mission. And that's why I say what we're doing is complementary, because of course you've been focusing on the startup, but I've been looking at what's there and the notion that somehow we are contemplating essentially an infrastructure which is not ours. And I wholly agree with the importance of this. The difficulty, of course, and do I need to say it politically, is that what you've constructed is another paradigm. And while it is novel, it is not necessarily challenging the incumbents. What I'm suggesting and what I think we need to do to retrieve for Europe some capabilities inevitably clashes against the incumbents who are saying, look, we've got this wonderful service suite here. Why do you need to even try? We are nice. We are serving you. You can build on top of us. And any effort to try and carve a position for us, which is not everything, you know, we are not saying rip it up and throw it away. It's not the case. But every effort meets with, but this is really dangerous. You will go backwards. You will kill your productivity. This is what we are faced with. And the ultimate pusillanimity of governments who don't want to upset the current
100%.
powers that be, and so they try and somewhat take a path of least resistance. So that's what worries me about
the funny thing for me is always like we're now at the point where people are like, we can't build LLMs. I'm like, okay, we could. It's just like a ton of cost and effort. But then there was like, we also cannot build Microsoft Office, and therefore we cannot move away. And I'm like, okay, so we can't do the last generation. We can't do the generation. Like, maybe we should just give up. Or what's the idea? You know, the way I think of this is to fix tech in Europe. Or like, people don't like tech sometimes. Let's call it like innovation. To make it possible that innovation can actually go on the market. And like for now, this is like tech. Maybe in future it's bio. Maybe it's pharma. Like 50 other industries. You know, how can you get innovation to the market? I think of it as a core loop. So, and that core loop can only compete on continental scale. Like it has to be a market that's big enough so that you have actually the dynamism in the market, that the best people invest in the best founders, and therefore those founders get a lot of credentials and like pull up, and like a lot of people eyeballs on it and all this kind of stuff. For that, you need something like EO Inc., like standardization of investments, incorporation, and stock options. And that's like, if you fix that, the early stage is like 10x better, 100x better. Then the other thing you need to do is like the exit scenario. So like an IPO case. A lot of the reasons why these industrial robotics companies we mentioned before, like ABB is a good example, they sold to SoftBank, which is like, what the hell? You know, like in the times of robotics, they're selling their companies for 4 billion, something like that. You know, that's like a seed round in San Francisco right now. Like, what the hell is happening? You know, the main reality for me, at least, is because there isn't the stock market big enough. If they would be in the States, there's no way they sell. They would just go on the NASDAQ, you know, and then it like jumps at 4, then it goes to 10 or whatever, you know, because there's so much volatility in the market, there's so much volume in the market. It makes sense to go IPO. Of course, it doesn't make sense to go IPO in Switzerland. Like, I get it, you know, like we have stock markets that are smaller than like some of the startups that come out of that region, you know, like, of course that doesn't work. You need a pan-European solution. So like, that's the core loop. And then you can like add more money into this. You can have easy employment. There's multiple things, but those can be fixed on national level. But the core loop on European level is incorporation and exit. And then additionally, the other one is you almost need to think about every industry full stack. And that starts like from the lowest level, ideally from like mining, you know, up to the application layer and everything in between. So the goal is not just to do cloud. The idea is to do the whole hardware stack of cloud as well, you know. And obviously, like, that's hard to do and that's scary to do. But like, as a continent, it's absolutely doable. And especially if you also take into account that a lot of those industries are constantly changing. So right now in compute, you have like optical compute and so on and so on. Like, there's so much happening, you know. And there's like multiple industries where like right now this is possible. And thinking full stack is scary, you know, and it's very counterintuitive, because the classical European way is like, is there a quick fix we can do? Is there like a little thing we can do here and there, you know? And that's obviously hard. The Chinese did this very, very well, because they intentionally want to be full stack on everything. Like, and because of that, now China will be the first country in the world in humanity's history that's able to think about every problem from a point of energy abundance. And if you have infinite energy, you can rethink every problem, you know, like climate change. You can get the carbon out of the air. If you have infinite energy, this is no problem, you know. Compute or like AI, if you have infinite energy for AI, like, that's becoming like the complete new industries open up, you know. Same is with automation manufacturing. Like, you can rethink everything if you have infinite energy. And China is now the only and first country who will be able to do that, because they intentionally thought full stack about everything.
Mm-hmm. But so you talk about, of course, the sort of the innovation and then the exit, and then the sort of the bit in the middle, which is where we are now. The thing we grapple with on the stack is really how to induce migration to European solutions. Because as we all agree, you can talk about great things like using European assets, but unless there is demand, unless there is actual money to be made through contracts, through shifts, then things don't happen. So my clear experience of the Eurostack is that people talk about it, particularly at the grassroots level. This is something that people have absolutely internalized. People, when you go around Europe and talk, they say, hell yeah, we need to have European assets, absolutely. But then when you have to shift from your comfortable AWS, from your comfortable Azure, from your comfortable Google to a European solution, well, you know, I have this very comfortable wall-to-wall thing and the functionalities. So this is what we need to shift out of, because I think it is a trap in which we are somehow captured, and I don't think it's realistic.
It's I would deconstruct this. So there is industries that are 10, 20 years old, like cloud, for example, you know. And obviously, like, if you have already something established and you're using it for 10 years, like, switching from that is a pain in the ass to do. But there is also like new industries popping up. There is also like new technologies popping up. So I would almost like have different strategies for those. And in some cases, they're as nascent as they are in the States. Like fusion energy is like we are eating in that, but like it's as nascent everywhere. But still, an American founder will be able to raise at least 10x of the amount of a European founder. Quantum compute, we are leading in multiple areas here. We have like multiple companies that are already like actually having quantum compute available as a cloud infrastructure and all this kind of stuff. By the way, if you want to hear about amazing European companies, I can do this for an hour. I have a YouTube channel for that, and I'm intentionally keeping it like narrow now because I'm so close to pitching each of them, but we have this, but that's the next generation. But like we need to have for them, we need to almost like think what is the infrastructure they need to become as successful. So they are the number one, so that later on nobody needs to switch to them because they're already using it. That being said, I fully agree with you that we also need to think about all the quote-unquote classic infrastructures, like cloud. And cloud also for me means semiconductors, GPUs, all this kind of stuff. We need alternatives there, we can't just like do all of that there. And in China, for example. And we are right now in such an extreme coupling to China and to the States that even like warfare wouldn't be possible without Chinese part right now. Because like if you do drones, like you can source a lot of the components now in Europe, but like the magnets will still come out of China. The actuator will still come out of China. Like there's like so many parts that will still come out of China, and the batteries will still come out of China.
Andreas?
Huh?
I mean, Europe 20 years ago was at the forefront of technology. You had companies like Nokia and Ericsson inventing radio technology and giving it to the world. And now 20 years later, we are somewhat shriveled and everything is really depressing, but at the same time, something we cannot give up on. It's not like we've been 300 years behind. We have been 20 years of doing not very much, and look where we are.
Yeah, that's the thing that I'm trying to get people to understand, that we are living in this kind of technology. Everything is compounding. So even if you're just like 5 years behind, those 5 years of innovations compound, And the problem we have is a lot of the economists call it like high productivity industries or high productivity jobs, like has been software. And because they were like better at software, like they all of a sudden were also better in cloud. Because they were better in cloud, they were better in AI. Because they were better in AI, they are now better in frontier AI, and so on and so on, And these kind of things compound really quickly. And the problem we have is, I see this regularly. Like you have a company that's good here, they cannot become great here. And they now have the choice to either stay good or they go to the States. And that's a huge issue we have, So in so many cases, like back in the days when Nokia was a thing and all this kind of stuff, the market was way slower. You could win locally and then go to the next market and next market. Like, sure, you can, Nowadays, a friend of mine, he built a side project, like basically a few weeks before Christmas. He showed it to Christmas. We're like, holy crap, that's insane. It's basically an AI agent that has like access to all his data and can do everything, He went viral in like a week, all of a sudden it's the most used GitHub project. There's like countless of videos on him and all this kind of stuff. He got like an acquisition by OpenAI like 6 weeks later, you know what I mean? And now he's moving to San Francisco. And like that's the speed we are now at. And this thing is not like he's like hailed in the whole the whole thing is called OpenClaw if you want to Google it afterwards. And like the guy is called Peter Steinberg, a good friend of mine. This whole thing is now like he's hailed as like the Jesus of AI all of a sudden, And that happened within a few weeks. And that's just different to how it was like 20 years ago. You know what I mean? Because the media wasn't that fast. The interconnectivity wasn't that fast. But now we live in this time where the internet acts as this perfect communication media where everything can pop up everywhere. And now the only question is like, how quick is your market? And like, how much power law can you pull, And their large unified markets are just more powerful. And that's the big difference now.
So last brief topic. One of the things that I find most frustrating about Europeans, we talk about the great things we are, at the same time, the things that hold us back. And we cannot avoid talking about the things that hold us back because we got to deal with it. One of the things that I find most frustrating is, yes, you, your friends, your mate are outside of this paradigm, but the general sentiment that I find incredibly frustrating is this notion that we need to somehow wait for the institutions to do something for us.
Mhm.
We need the commission to do X. We need the
Mhm.
government to do Y. And I remember
Mhm.
reading something you wrote time ago in which you said, I don't want to even think about the government coming in and doing stuff for me. It's a sentiment that I share, because much as these people are well-meaning and very nice, they are not entrepreneurial fundamentally.
Yeah.
They're not technical. They're lawyers and bureaucrats. And so it is not going to be the case that we as Europeans can punt to the public sector as our future. It is not going to happen. We need to either
Yeah.
do it ourselves or not. I
Yeah.
mean, this is a frustration that I have. Everyone you talk to is always somewhat expecting that the Commission will put in place something magical, some magical thinking that will make us all suddenly wonderful and
Yeah.
sprout wings. And how is that going to happen? How do we infuse this entrepreneurial drive back again? Because that's the only thing that works.
This is, by the way, also one of my pet peeves. Is it's almost like everybody in government is an idiot, but also everything should be fixed by the government. And I'm like, which one is it?
Which is it?
Like pick one. It can't be both. And this was also like our thinking behind the proposal. We want to be as detailed as possible, because we were like, look, this is hard for us to agree on. And we are like, I have been doing this like longer than I like to admit, and in our team are like insane experts in each field. And for us, it was hard to agree what is the right path. I cannot imagine like a random politician who has never started a company in their whole life to do that. The quote that you mentioned is, I wrote an article once about startup hubs, and I said basically something along the lines of like, a lot of people have opinions how startups should be done, and how the government should be helping with building startup hubs. And the worst part about this, many of them work in the government. And I still fundamentally believe that it's startup hubs, for example, is a good example. It's like very bottoms up. You cannot create a PowerPoint how a region becomes a startup hub. That happens on grassroots level, And it's really fascinating to me, because I work very closely with student clubs and hacker houses and like all these kind of like self-selecting groups of young people, and they get more done with like almost no budget to build hubs than anything you have from the government. And I can give you countless examples here. Like I have in Vienna, there's like a group in a school. They're like 16 to 19 years old. They're like kids, and they build deepfake detection, drone stuff. Like they build sci-fi stuff essentially. And one of them was approaching me and was like, hey, we're thinking about raising money for this one idea we have. And like, how much do you need? Like $5,000, we need like a new graphic card. And like, what? And I'm like, okay, let's here's a nonprofit, like set up the nonprofit, here's a donation, have fun, Out of that group, there's like one founder group out of that student group, they pupil group, they raised $500 million. Obviously in San Francisco, not here, but like still, multiple others got into YC. There is in Zurich, there is a student group called ETH Robotics of the ETH. They are some of the most insane robotics people you will ever find, And they're working together every day to build robots. In Helsinki, you have a group called FR8 of Freight, which is basically one big house. And I'm not allowed to talk about the house yet because of the new one, but like insanely big, beautiful old house. And there's 20 to 30 young people doing nothing else but building every day. And you don't get in by having a great business plan. You're getting in by being very biased to action and very obsessed about a high-skilled talent topic, like a tech topic. So you need to be extremely good, and that you get in. They don't care what your business model is. They don't want you to build a startup. They want you to build something you're actually obsessed about. And out of that group will come the next Google, 100%. These kind of like self-selecting, almost like safe spaces for ambition of young people will do more for European progress than any government initiative can, And what do they have in common? They are curating. They're like making sure they work with the right people. They are extremely biased to action. They just like do stuff, which is completely underrated scale in Europe or like in the world actually. And they're completely obsessed with the topic. They want to do this one thing. And if this one thing is building farms on the moon, then this one thing is building farms on the moon. Who knows? But they want to do that. And I genuinely think we can learn more from these groups, and we can achieve more by supporting these groups without like messing with them, like not tell them what to do, but just like, what do you need? Here's what you need. This will be more than any big other thing in early stage. Mid stage, late stage is a different discussion. Like they cannot fund like billions of dollars, obviously, But to filter the next high profile group of like Google level founders, this will be more successful than most of the university programs, most of the government accelerators, most of all this kind of nonsense,
Well, thank you so much. You're a burst of energy, and certainly someone I could talk to for hours. I am super thankful that you took the time. I
Likewise.
was absolutely riveted hearing you. This is a conversation that really needs to be propagated, and you should be adopted as, although you have better things to do, as the person in charge to make it happen. Because if anything can happen, it can only happen because of someone like you just pushing it. Andy, thank you so much again, and great talking to you.
Thank you, Cristina. And you don't get out of this that easily. Like, you have to be that person, I think, because you're the first person that gave me hope in policy work again. So, yeah. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.